What's going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for tonight's Monday Night Football slate, where we've got double the trouble, 2 games on the docket to break down. Gonna make sure you're ready for all of your exposure this evening. But first off, look at the fancy side and what I'm doing for my Draftkings lineups. That'll include how to handle a 2-gamer as opposed to a showdown slate. We'll go through some game theory, some stacking options, all of that sort of jazz to get you settled for DFS. And then afterwards, we're gonna focus on the betting and the prop side of things with some pick'em props and Underdog and Prize Picks that I like already, as well as some strategy on this 2-gamer as well. So a lot to go through here, guys. Let's not waste any time at all. Let's start off with, first off, look at the DraftKings side and what we're doing for DFS. I personally love these 2-gamers because it forces us to build a little bit differently. Unlike a main slate where you might have 2 to 3 players correlated from the same game, a midi stack with players from either side of a game, that would be 4 or 5 players in a lineup at the very most. You're going to have a lot more correlation on a 2-gamer like this. But unlike a showdown slate where we only have 6 players to choose from, where your entire lineup is going to be correlated with the same kind of game script, this is a little bit of a combination of both. You have 2 games to work with, so you could have 2 simultaneous game scripts that you're working with building your lineups. And I think that's the best way to go out there and approach these kind of slates, is before you even start clicking names into lineups, is to have an idea of what the expected outcome will be in both cases. And that doesn't have to be the same game scripts in every lineup that you're entering. For example, you could assume that Denver, who's the biggest favorite for tonight, rolls in a lot of your portfolio. But if you want to try and go for some large hill GPP exposure and really get some differentiation, maybe explore the underdogs getting there. Maybe Cincinnati has their best offensive game of the season, and even if they don't pull off the victory, it could be a little bit more competitive there and give you a completely different looking lineup than what you'd have if Denver's playing from ahead. Because if we're going with a Denver dominated script, assuming this is like for the showdown side, it'd be a lot of running backs, defenses, that kind of stuff for Denver, to try and take advantage of that. Whereas if you're playing for more of that competitive game script, maybe it's more of the wide receivers or tight ends that you're taking from both of those teams. So that's how I approach the slate a little bit differently than what we have in either case, and why I absolutely love building for it. So let's start at quarterback. It's also a really good segue into some of the scripts and some of the correlation that we can play for tonight. And Bo Nix is up top, who we've already hinted at. They are the biggest favorites that we have on the slate, about a touchdown difference between the Bengals and the Broncos. They also have one of the best defenses in the NFL, so Jake Browning has the worst projection at that quarterback position, but Bo Nix is also your highest owned player. He's not the best points per dollar projection. That is a Justin Fields at $5,500, but I think why more people are willing to get to a Bo Nix is that you have all the salary that you could possibly want on a slate like this. You could pretty much use all the spend ups on the slate and still be able to build some pretty decent lineups. And on top of that, he's also the quote unquote safer quarterback. He's got just as much, maybe a little bit less rushing upside than a Justin Fields, and a bunch of pass catching options that are viable stacking threats too. So that's why at $6,000, I've got him at about 37%. But you can see Justin Fields there at $5,500 is also about 30% owned. So from the ownership angle, guys like Tua and Jake Browning are really being overlooked for tonight. So in large hill GPPs, if you're trying to get some differentiation, those would be the 2 quarterbacks to go through. And considering that the Dolphins are the favorites tonight, I think that he's probably the most realistic of those 2 leverage quarterbacks at about 17-18% projected ownership. But Jake Browning, who is going to be sub 15% owned at the quarterback position, could be the real leverage piece here. And if they're playing from behind, that would spur on even more passing usage for the Bengals. The real concern here is the defense on the other side, which is a top 5, a top 10 unit against the pass in pretty much every single category in the NFL. So that's going to be a hard hurdle to overcome. But based on pure volume alone, it doesn't necessarily have to be efficient workload for that Bengals passing offense. That could get them to the optimal lineup. So I would say that all 4 of these quarterbacks are going to be viable. You can see the 3 that I currently have in my player pool. These projection sheets are from my Patreon page, by the way. So if you want to download these, that is the place to do so. They will change quite a bit throughout the day. So this isn't necessarily where I'm going to end up at the very end of the night. Ownership changes, the kind of steam that we get closer to lock is going to have a lot to do with that. But Bo Nix in some of my single entries or cash lineups is likely the quarterback that I'm going to go with. Like I said, the highest floor of these guys. So in that format, that's really what I'm prioritizing. But in GPPs or even in some single entries, I love myself some Tua. And then if I'm playing in the big lottery style GPPs, the big 50 to 100,000 entry plus contest, Jake Browning's going to be the quarterback that I'm going with. And along with these quarterbacks, there's going to be a lot of stacking, a lot of correlation that we're going with. At Jake Browning, paired up with at least 1 to 2 pass catchers, probably closer to 2 in most cases. Same thing with a Tua, because neither of these quarterbacks have a whole lot of rushing upside to them. But a Bo Nix, a Justin Fields, you could conceivably play naked. In most cases, I will have at least 1 pass catcher though, because you got to remember it's only a 2-game slate. It's not like main slate where we've got 10, 11, even 12, 13 games to choose from at times. When you have that many different games where players can go off, a naked quarterback's a lot more viable, as, you know, even if it's just one passing touchdown from a Nix or a Fields to a wide receiver, they probably don't get there when there's 13 whole games. However, when there's only 2 games to choose from and only so many skill position players that we even have to choose from, that touchdown correlation is a lot more important. So I would want at least one pass catcher with those top 2, but not 2+ like we have with these bottom 2. Next up, let's go to running back, where we got A-Chain as by far the chalkiest player on the slate. I've got him at about 83% projected ownership, which is just ridiculous, but a lot of it's the price tag. As I previously mentioned, you can use almost whoever you want with how soft the pricing is, and given that his touchdown equity is over 50%. He's juiced towards the over to score at a lot of these sports books. He's got a 5 reception line. He's expected to get a ton of usage out of the backfield there. On a PPR website like we have on Draftkings, he's somebody that's really tough to completely ignore. But you can see towards the right over here, I'm going to be under the field on Achane, and it's partially because he's 83% owned. The only way to get any sort of leverage would be to lock him into every single lineup, and I like a lot of these running backs below him, so I'm not 100% sure where I'll end up percentage-wise on Achane in my lineups, but it'll be well under that 80% mark. Whether it's 30%, whether it's closer to 50 to 60%, we'll have to see when it's all said and done. But the running backs that I like a little bit more are the ones that aren't getting as much ownership. And these starters are all going to be over 50%, so you're not really getting any leverage there, but they are 30 to 40% lower owned, which does help you out a little bit. It's not going to really take you from a chalky lineup to a quote-unquote low-owned lineup, but that in conjunction with another pivot or 2 at wide receiver and tight end is where you can get the differentiation that's required for those 50 to 100,000 entry contests. And that's also why I won't be using a Bo Nix in an 100,000 plus entry contest, because you've got so much chalk at running back, so much chalk at defense as well, that it's really tough to get that differentiation unless you really start being intentional about it at those skill positions. So let's go through some of these running backs. So you got Chase Brown. They, of course, are the underdogs against the Broncos. I would say that if any of these running backs ends up steaming down with the ownership, it probably is a Brown, just because of the game script at hand. But he's also a PPR heavy wide receiver, gets a bunch of looks out of the backfield, and in particular last year was getting a bunch of receiving usage. Not so much the case in 2025, but I have a feeling that that's going to come around at some point. So at $6,600, he's somebody that I'm certainly going to be using, and probably going to be my top leverage running back on the slate. And when we have these 2 games, and by the way, these 4 teams, I don't think any of them are world killers. I mean, the Broncos are the best team by far of the 4 that we have here, but touchdown favorites is probably a stretch. I think it should be closer to 4.5, 5 points personally. And then the other game, which is only a 3.5 point spread between the Jets and the Dolphins, I mean, that's almost a pick 'em right there. So at the running back position, if everyone's going to use Achane and they're only 3.5 point favorites, like, I think that's pretty blasphemous. And I could see a J.K. Dobbins getting some steam as we get closer to lock, because he's playing on the team that is about a touchdown favorite. So if anyone's going to really have conviction at that running back position, they usually like playing people that are playing from ahead. That leads to extra usage, so there's a lot of merit to playing the guys that are the biggest favorites on the slate. But if he steams up from about 50% ownership at this point to closer to 60, 65%, it's really going to have me on guys like a Chase Brown and then a Breece Hall down here. And Breece Hall and the Jets, they are going to be slate underdogs against Miami, which is understandable, but I do think it's pretty close to that pick 'em as I was saying before. So if he ends up going down with the ownership, maybe ends up moonwalking as we get closer to tonight's lock, he's going to be one of my favorite plays that we have here. But as of now, I'm kind of just mixing in every running back where it makes sense. I'm going to be correlating it with the rest of my lineup as well. So for example, if I'm expecting Denver to be playing from behind, maybe in one of those large field GPP lineups where I'm fading that Bo Nix chalk, that kind of stuff, maybe use a Chase Brown at running back, playing from ahead, right? Getting the advantage, getting all the boost of playing from that positive game script, and it's something that you need to combine with your quarterback exposure. So that's why you can't really look at players individually. You have to be thinking about the entire picture as a whole, and thinking about that game script before you even start clicking these players into lineups is usually the best way to go about it. Next up, we got these backup running backs, which I don't think you can ignore in the large field GPP exposure. I would not be using these players in cash or single entry though under any circumstances. Really, the only reason to be going to these backup running backs would be to get that differentiation and make sure you're not going to duplicate yourself. But if Brandon Allen will be playing for the Jets, RJ Harvey, I would say of the backup running backs, is probably my favorite, as he has a lot of rushing upside and has been playing quite a bit for the Broncos. And they are the favorites. They are expected to be playing from ahead. So if you're trying to play that chalky script, but you want to get a little bit different, maybe you could use an RJ Harvey on top of a Dobbins, or maybe instead of a J.K. Dobbins in that sort of lineup to try and get a low-owned player in there. You've also got an Ollie Gordon. He'll be playing for the Dolphins quite a bit. He's been the most effective running back behind Devin Achane. You've also got Samaje Perine, who's more of that receiving back for the Bengals. And what I like here is that they are the big underdogs. They're expected to be playing from a touchdown and behind. And when they're in that scenario, Perine plays a whole lot more because he's got that receiving upside. He's a better blocker than a Chase Brown. Chase Brown is still going to see some of that usage when it gets to the third, fourth quarter, but don't be surprised if they're getting absolutely killed to see a little bit more Perine than what we've been used to this year. So these are some of my GPP flyers that I'm using in this 50 to 100,000 entry plus contest to try and differentiate myself off of that 30 to 50, even 80% chalk. At wide receiver is another place where we can get a little bit different as well. Jamar Chase is 70% owned. You got a Tyreek Hill at about 60% himself. And a lot of that's just the pricing. You can pretty much use anyone. So the $8,000 price tag on Chase really isn't scaring anyone off. And also because Denver is that big favorite, a lot of people are playing for the Bengals to be passing the ball downfield. That would be directly to Jamar Chase's benefit there. Tyreek Hill, he's had a very quiet year. He's had a very quiet last 2 seasons in the NFL. $6,500, I would say, is a fair price tag on him. I don't think he projects particularly well or particularly poor. Garrett Wilson at $6,200, also getting quite a bit of steam, the second highest ownership mark that we have at this position. I don't know if I really agree with that. You can see with the projection that it's solid at 2.5x, but I don't know if he should be that second highest ownership mark. Cortland Sutton at $6,100. I'm kind of shocked that he's only 56% owned. He's got a better projection than Garrett Wilson, and he's on the team with the highest implied team total tonight. So you would expect him to probably get a lot of late steam, but if he doesn't, he'll be a player that I'm getting well over the field on. T. Higgins has also had an extremely cold start to 2025, and with Jake Browning at quarterback, I don't think a whole lot of people are going to be excited to play him. So the first row wide receiver where we're getting that differentiation would be a player like a T. Higgins. A Jalen Waddle's also about 34% there as well, but he's juiced for his under at 4.5 receptions on a lot of books. So I don't think that he's not popping in the projections, and that's a lot of the reason for that. A Troy Franklin, though, and anyone from Troy Franklin and below, is when we're starting to get to the really low-owned players. Franklin is still about 25%, but his projection is really starting to pop. He's at 2.6x. He's only $4,100, and if you're going to spend up for a Chase, maybe an Achane at running back, and especially in cash, you're going to want to spend up for a lot of those elite tier players. Getting to a Franklin or getting to one of these other cheaper wide receivers is massive in that kind of format as well. Or even going with the cheaper defense, cheaper quarterback could be a way to open up some of that salary. But for my money, Franklin at that 2.6x points per dollar value is probably my favorite option for that. Part of the reason for the projection being so high is Marvin Mims being questionable for the Broncos. He's the one real piece of injury news on offense that we're going to be worried about for tonight's slate. I do have him projected in for right now, but if he ends up missing some time, that would not only boost a Franklin like you've seen with that projection, but also a Cortland Sutton towards the top end of the board. You've also got a few other wide receivers that I'm mixing into lineups. A Malik Washington that is not only a GPP play for me, but also potentially in single entries or cash. He's over a 2x points per dollar value, so that's the real differentiator there. Of all these value plays towards the bottom, he's the quote-unquote safest option out of all of them. I'll be playing snaps for the Dolphins, third string wide receiver, also a gadget play kind of guy, so he could get some extra usage there. You got an Andre Yoshivas, that he'd be the third string wide receiver for the Bengals. He's at least going to play, especially out of that slot tonight. And the outside corners, the defense in general for the Broncos is top notch. So a player like Yoshivas, who's known for creating separation, could be a good look, because if anyone's going to get open tonight, particularly against like the third, fourth string cornerbacks, I think Andre might be that guy for the Bengals. So certainly somebody I'll be mixing into lineups. You got a Nick Westbrook-Akine will be playing for the Dolphins. He is like their third or even fourth string wide receiver. I'm not exactly sure which number he is on the depth chart, but has been playing some snaps for Miami this year. So at $3,000, you can't completely roll him out, but this would be a GPP flyer at best, maybe a 5 to 7%er, and only in those 50 to 100,000 plus entry contests. And then a Trent Sherfield Jr. is also somebody that you could use from the Denver side of things, but way down on the depth chart. So this is more of a play if Mims were to be out. If Mims were out, this would highly benefit him, not just from a usage standpoint, but also from a projection standpoint, to probably about a 5-point projection. So the ownership would come up. It'd probably be closer to 1 to 5% ownership if that's the case. But if you're looking for pivots and a way to differentiate yourself on top of maybe some of those backup running backs, it's these wide receivers. And I would say that I like these wide receivers a little bit more than the running backs. These backup running backs, some of them might only see playing time if they're getting killed, if they're playing from way ahead. Maybe they go to the backup rather than that starting running back, or maybe as a third down back or a red zone, maybe they fall into the end zone and score that way. It's kind of sketchy with those backup running backs. And, these players, there's a reason why they're sub 5% owned in a lot of cases. At the wide receiver position, though, almost all these guys are going to play no matter what. The question is how much they're going to play. If somebody like Mims is out, that would obviously boost some of the exposure down there. But players like a Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, maybe he takes his few snaps and ends up scoring a 40, 50-yard touchdown. Maybe Yoshi Voss gets 4 to 5 receptions for like 30 yards, and that is his way to the optimal lineup. Not a sexy play, but 8 to 10 points might be enough on a 2-game slate like this. These wide receivers have, in my opinion, a much clearer route to that optimal lineup, and that's where I'm going to be getting a lot of my differentiation for this evening. You've also got the tight end position, where Evan Ingram is going to be a pretty big piece of chalk. He's on the highest team total of the slate, also is the most expensive tight end, and at only $3,700, he's another big reason, and this position is another big reason why you can pretty much use whoever the heck you want on the slate. Usually we have at least a 5K tight end, like a Kelsey and Andrews, somebody that's at least a little bit more expensive than we have here, but pretty much it's free to use that tight end position. Darren Waller is not projecting particularly well. He's less than a 1x points per dollar value, but if you're looking to get differentiation in those large field GPPs, he is going to be sub 10% and one of the rare players over $2,500 that's going to have that sub 10% ownership mark. So in large field GPPs, maybe it could be a look for that Dolphins offense. Mike Gesicki is getting a huge boost this week with Noah Fant out. He was rolled out a few days ago, so that news is going to be accounted for in most projection sets that you see. And I've got him at a 2.3x points per dollar value. So if I was playing in cash, anything that is a single entry contest, Mike Gesicki is most likely going to be in there. Solid floor, probably about a 5-point floor with upside for a touchdown and over a 10-point game. And Mason Taylor also projects really well, but he's on that Jets offense, which is a little bit sketchy in my opinion. So if there's a piece of chalk that might fail tight end, it feels like he's the one that I'm most likely going to be fading. But you've also got your Adam Troutmans, your Lucas Krolls for the Broncos. I mean, they're going to be playing. They're not going to be playing a ton, but maybe they score a touchdown and they can correlate with Bo Nix that way. And that's about it. You've got some of these pure punt play tight ends towards the bottom. I will admit that Drew Sample is at least a little bit tempting now that you have Noah Fant out. In fact, in large field GPP exposure, he'll probably make at least a few of my lineups. You have Tanner Hudson for that team as well. He hasn't been contributing that much this year, but with that injury ahead of him, that could open up a few more snaps. You've got a Jeremy Ruckert. He's been a little bit better this year than I think most people were giving him credit for as well. Just like these wide receivers, these tight ends, they play in 2 tight end sets. You have the tight ends because they're blocking. They're so heavily intensive in their place physically that a lot of times they have to just come out for a breather or two. These tight ends are going to play just like the wide receivers, and in my opinion, a little bit more viable for that differentiation than what you have at that running back or quarterback position. And then finally, at defense, it's pretty much a complete toss-up. Defenses are almost impossible to project on the NFL basis. I mean, we can look at the spread, we can look at the team totals, and that helps you out a little bit, but to get to the optimal lineup, usually it's like a defensive touchdown or a blocked kick or a quarterback throwing 2 to 3 interceptions or getting sacked 4 to 5 times that leads to that optimal lineup. So Broncos defense is the one that I have projecting the best, but there's a good chance that I'm playing all 4 tonight. So as of right now, I've got the top 3 defenses in my player pool. I might just end up adding the Bengals just in case, because even though they are the biggest underdogs that you have on the slate, if Bo Nix throws a pick 6 or if there's a fumble that's returned for a touchdown, might not even be Bo's fault. It could be a kicker or something, right? That fumbles and they ended up taking it back for 6. That could make them the optimal play tonight. So I'm usually somebody that just kind of punts that defense position, tries to get leverage where I can. And in those large field GPPs, you're going to get some leverage if you're using a Jets or a Bengals defense. They do have the worst projections on the slate, but if you can stomach that, if you can embrace the chaos of that defense position, could pay off with a little bit of a lower round combination. And now for the pick 'em and the prop side of things, where I've got a few props that I've already mixed in. You might want to go out there and tail yourself. And my apologies, in the last video on the prop side, we did not have our best stuff there. Ended up being a pretty decent Sunday, but unfortunately the free slips that we gave out ended up being the ones that didn't hit for us. So let's try and bounce back there, try and give you guys a little bit of profit here for the Monday Night Football slate and give you guys a bounce back from that perspective. But first prop we're going to go through here would be a Devin Achane over on touchdowns. And a couple of reasons why I like this. You've got the Dolphins as slight favorites, so the game script could be at least a little bit favorable for Achane, but mostly this is a line value. He is minus 136 for his over on Pinnacle. This, of course, is the two-way market where you can bet the over and the under, which is a lot more respectable than sites like Draftkings and FanDuel, where sometimes they'll be closer to minus 150, minus 160 odds to score. In Achane, if we go to the Hard Rock Bet site, just to show you an example of that, he's minus 170 towards the over. So it's BS. It's because you can't bet the under that they'll completely screw you and put so much juice on that over side. But on a site like Underdog, where we're getting them at even money, there's still some value to be had because even those two-way markets have him at that nearly minus 140 mark. And if you take a look at his season stats so far, he's been involved a ton as a running back and as a wide receiver out of the backfield. In this Jets defense, if you take a look at their fantasy rankings against opposing running backs, they're bottom 10 in almost every single category. So, I mean, they're one of the best defenses that we have in the league. That secondary is something to be feared, but not so much with the front seven. They've been allowing a little bit more usage, a little bit more efficiency on the ground than what they're used to. So Achane has a favorable matchup here, which, week one, I don't think a lot of us would have been saying, but through a full 3 weeks at this point, it's looking like that's going to be the case in 2025. So that's the first over that I played. Them being 3.5 point favorites really doesn't make that much of a difference for me. It's more so the matchup and the kind of usage that he's seen here in 2025, which is elite compared to what he's had in the last few years. And then on top of that, I took this over on Jake Browning passing attempts. This is minus 142 for his over on sportsbooks, and a lot of other books have him at 33.5 already. So a little bit of sportsbook line value on that one. And as the big underdogs, if we're being realistic tonight, the Bengals are probably going to be passing a lot. And over the last few weeks, you've seen that from Browning outside of last week where it was just downright horrendous. Turnovers every couple plays. It's hard to really get that many passing attempts when you can't put together a sustained drive. But his starts in the NFL before that, he's been chucking the ball 40 plus times. And a lot of times it's because they're playing from behind. He's not the most efficient quarterback, turns the ball over quite a bit. And this defense on Denver is going to be a really tough test. And to this point of the year, I guess that was my main concern here, was that this could be another really tough week for Jake Browning. But even then, Denver, who has been stifling on that defensive side of the ball, has allowed over 36 passing attempts per game, a lot of which because they force checkdowns, they force throwaways because of how tight that coverage can be. So Jake Browning is probably going to be chucking it early and often if that game script comes to fruition, and we're getting a little bit of line value there as well. So the site to play it on is on Underdog, like you guys can see right here. It is a full 3x payout. No correlation, of course, because it's in two different games. But on Prize Picks, you do have the same line on Achane, but Browning's already 0.5 higher. So that's why the advantageous spot pick'em wise is at least to take it here in Underdog. And compared to the sports books like I have on Hard Rock Bet, that's the site that I personally play a lot of my exposure on, it'd only be a 2.72x payout. So obviously a little bit different when they put it in this plus money format, but still the best payout that you can possibly find right now would be on Underdog Fantasy. So that'll be the slip that we're taking here for the Monday Night Football 2 gamer. Again, apologies for the last video on us. We went 0-3 on those slips. Not my best stuff there for sure, but we did end up doing a lot better outside of that. So Bankroll still doing pretty solid here for 2025. I just want to get you guys your get back here for the YouTube free slip. So let's cash out. Best of luck out there with all the exposure that you guys are going with. And let's have ourselves a Monday Night Football slate. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. It'll also include our Thursday Night Football preview, dropping on in just a couple days, as well as all the content throughout the season. We got ourselves all the island games covered for Showdown, also all the main slates on every single week of the year. So subscribe so you guys don't miss any of that when it drops, and also check out the Patreon page for all the extra content for the year. We got ourselves the projection sheets that I showed you guys throughout this video as they update and get a little bit more accurate as we get closer to lock, as well as all the pick'em and prop exposure that I'm entering as well. That's where I post them as soon as I'm entering it, so you can catch anything before any potential bumps, and all of the exposure that I'm entering. So check it out if you guys haven't already. Also help support my channel with any of those Patreon memberships and all the content that we're putting together, and it gives you every single piece of content that I'm making. But that's all, guys. I appreciate your support here on the channel, and I see you guys for the content for Thursday Night Football.